In 1937, parents across America gave their sick children a new medicine that tasted sweet, looked safe, and promised relief. But hidden inside the bottle was a chemical used in antifreeze. No one had tested it. By the time officials realized what was happening, children were vomiting, collapsing, and dying from kidney failure. And the most disturbing part was this: at the time, selling it was not clearly illegal. Elixir Sulfanilamide. To understand how a deadly poison could be legally manufactured and sold as a children's medicine, we have to look back to the mid-1930s. At this time, a new miracle drug had taken the medical world by storm. Sulfanilamide was one of the very first antibacterial drugs, a forerunner to modern antibiotics, that proved incredibly effective at curing streptococcal infections, saving patients from illnesses that were previously a death sentence. But there was a catch. Sulfanilamide was typically only available in powder or tablet form, making it large, bitter, and incredibly difficult to administer to children suffering from strep throat. In the summer of 1937, salesmen for the S.E. Massengill Company, a pharmaceutical firm based in Bristol, Tennessee, reported high demand for a liquid version of the drug. The task of creating this liquid fell to the company's chief chemist and pharmacist, Harold Cole Watkins. Watkins immediately ran into a problem, as sulfanilamide is highly insoluble in the standard liquids commonly employed in medicines. After experimenting with various solvents, Watkins found that the drug dissolved perfectly in a chemical called diethylene glycol. To make the medicine appealing to children, he added raspberry flavoring, saccharin, and red coloring, resulting in a sweet, pink liquid. Watkins named his new concoction Elixir Sulfanilamide. The company's control laboratory tested the mixture for its flavor, its appearance, and its fragrance, and deemed it ready for the market. What the Massengill Company did not test for was toxicity. Under the obsolete 1906 Food and Drugs Act that governed the nation at the time, pharmaceutical companies were not legally required to prove that their drugs were safe before placing them on pharmacy shelves. If Watkins had consulted the medical literature of his own era, he would have learned that diethylene glycol was a deadly poison commonly used as antifreeze, known to destroy human kidneys. Instead, without a single safety test on animals, the Massengill Company manufactured 240 gallons of the liquid and sent out 633 shipments to pharmacies and doctors across the country in September 1937. It did not take long for the nightmare to begin. In early October, reports began flooding into the American Medical Association from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where several patients, including children, had suddenly died of unexplained kidney failure. The only link between the victims was a recent prescription for Elixir Sulfanilamide. The symptoms of the poisoning were horrific and uniform. Patients first suffered severe abdominal cramps, nausea, and unrelenting vomiting. This was followed by anuria, the complete stoppage of urine, as the diethylene glycol systematically destroyed their kidneys. Relatives recounted that victims slipped into stupors and thrashed in agonizing pain for anywhere from 7 to 21 days before finally lapsing into convulsions and dying. There was no known antidote. Researchers at the University of Chicago and the AMA laboratory quickly isolated the diethylene glycol as the lethal agent. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration was alerted. The Massengill Company had already sent out telegrams to its salesmen and doctors requesting the return of the product, but horrifyingly, they failed to mention that the drug was lethal. The FDA had to step in and force the company to send a second wave of messages stating that the product might be dangerous to life. What followed was one of the most desperate and massive manhunts in medical history. The FDA assigned nearly its entire field force of 239 inspectors to track down every single bottle before it could be consumed. The search was a logistical nightmare. Inspectors waded through tens of thousands of sales slips to trace 200 salesmen across the country. Some druggists had sold the poison over the counter to people whose names they never recorded, and some physicians, terrified of liability, lied to investigators or gave them fake names. In one instance, in East St. Louis, an inspector tracked down a woman who claimed she had simply thrown the medicine away. When pressed, she admitted throwing it out the window into an alleyway where the inspector found the bottle unbroken, still containing enough sweet, raspberry-flavored poison to kill any child who might have found it. In South Carolina, after a doctor lied to an inspector about patient deaths, local gossip led the agent to the sister of a deceased lumber mill worker. Following local customs, the family had placed the man's medicine bottles on top of his fresh grave, about a mile and a half back in the woods. When the inspector walked to the gravesite, he found a bottle of Elixir Sulfanilamide resting on the dirt. The human cost of this disaster was staggering. The poison killed at least 105 people, the vast majority of them young children treated for minor sore throats. The trauma inflicted on the parents and the prescribing doctors was immeasurable. Dr. A.S. Calhoun, a physician who unknowingly poisoned his own patients, wrote a haunting letter stating, "To realize that 6 human beings, all of them my patients, one of them my best friend, are dead because they took medicine that I prescribed for them innocently has given me such days and nights of mental and spiritual agony as I did not believe a human being could undergo and survive." Even more devastating were the letters sent directly to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. One mother wrote to him about the death of her 6-year-old daughter, Joan. She wrote, "Even the memory of her is mixed with sorrow, for we can see her little body tossing to and fro and hear that little voice screaming with pain, and it seems as though it would drive me insane." But here is where the tragedy transitions into a systemic nightmare. When the FDA moved to seize the drug and punish the company, they ran into a wall of archaic legislation. The Massengill Company had broken absolutely no laws by failing to test their product, nor had they broken any laws by selling a deadly poison. The only reason the FDA had the legal authority to step in and confiscate the remaining shipments was due to a bizarre technicality. The product was labeled as an elixir. By strict pharmacological definition, an elixir must contain alcohol. Because Watkins had used diethylene glycol instead of alcohol, the product was technically misbranded. FDA Commissioner Walter Campbell pointed out the terrifying truth. If the Massengill Company had simply named their product a solution instead of an elixir, the FDA would have had zero legal jurisdiction to recall the drug, and many more children would have died. The company's owner, Samuel Evans Massengill, publicly deflected all blame, famously stating, "I do not feel that there was any responsibility on our part. The only penalty the company received was a maximum fine of $26,000 for the misbranding." The chemist, Harold Watkins, was unable to live with what his creation had done. He later shot himself, and it was widely believed to be suicide. The public outrage over the Elixir Sulfanilamide tragedy was absolute. The disaster proved to the nation that relying on the morals of manufacturers was not enough. The tragedy directly forced a stalled piece of legislation through Congress, and in 1938, President Roosevelt signed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act into law. For the very first time in American history, the law required that manufacturers actually prove the safety of their new drugs through experimental testing before they could ever be sold to the public. It transformed the FDA from a weak regulatory body into a powerful gatekeeper of public health. Today, every medicine in your cabinet, every pill prescribed by a doctor, and every syrup given to a child is tested because of this disaster. The legal loophole that killed over 100 people is exactly why that loophole no longer exists. Elixir Sulfanilamide remains a dark, silent hazard of history, a reminder of an era when a parent's absolute trust in a sweet-tasting medicine was the very thing that doomed their child.